Now, back to Professor Johnston, whose recent columns detail Trump's independent legal blitz on independent journalism. Professor Johnston, you've called Trump's media offensive authoritarian power grabbing. Is there a line that he crossed after re-election that he hadn't crossed before?
The principal line he crossed was saying, you will not report words contrary to what I say, as in the Associated Press, a nonprofit news service, saying it's the Gulf of Mexico. You're calling it, Mr. President, the Gulf of America, doesn't make it the Gulf of America. And then banning from the White House shows how much Donald wants to bring the press to heel. Now, bringing the press to heel has been a major project of the American right since something called the Powell Memo, written by a very prominent and smart lawyer who later became a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And it was a plan for how to make business in charge and to vanquish unions, consumer groups, environmental groups, and especially news organizations. Secondly, Donald's $20 billion lawsuit, was a $10 billion lawsuit earlier, against CBS, is over absolute nonsense. He contends that the news report damaged his chances of being president when, of course, he won the election, so there's no harm. What he's trying to do is use that lawsuit to extract money as a settlement because Sherry Redstone, the controlling owner of CBS, is trying to sell the business. And this litigation is interfering with the sale. In addition, Trump's administration must approve the sale because CBS owns television stations that broadcast over the public airwaves. And so this is a totally inappropriate use of government power to control the press in violation of the First Amendment. And let me just note that there's only been one case in American history of a broadcast chain that had to shut down because it was putting out fake news and blacking people out of the news. And I'm the journalist who developed that case, presented it to the public, and ultimately caused the second most profitable broadcaster in America to have to go out of business.
And do you believe that these bosses, because they do have diverse portfolios, don't they? They don't just have these news businesses like Bezos with the Washington Post. They also have very diverse business interests. Do you blame them for capitulating to Trump?
Well, you have a fiduciary duty when you are the head of a company, and the publisher of the LA Times, who's a billionaire cancer doctor and inventor, Jeff Bezos through Amazon, Sherry Redstone, CBS, all have to be concerned about their obligations to shareholders. On the other hand, they can stand up to Trump. And what we've seen is that where law firms stood up to Trump when he was saying, I'm going to ban you from defending anybody in the courts, which is an unconstitutional order, unless you give me up to $100 million of free legal services. Some of the firms bowed down and agreed, and some fought back, and the ones fighting back are being very successful in the courts. And if Sherry Redstone at CBS in particular said, we're not going to pay tribute to you, we are not going to be extorted by you, it might delay the sale of the company, but it's not going to harm her financial interests. She still has a highly profitable company that's keeping her in her multi-billionaire status. So a little more courage in the long run works better. Voluntary obedience to a dictator or wannabe dictator is the worst possible move. And for those people close to Trump, it's important to remember that the history of authoritarianism, which I've studied at great length, is that one of the first groups the dictator turns on are loyalists, because you have to make sure they're under your control.
Now, the FCC chair, on a similar point, Brendan Carr, is reviving the news distortion probes that were last used in the 1960s. How strange is this a tool to be used in 2025?
It's very bizarre. First of all, they're not going to come up with any evidence at the end of the day except concocted things. But claiming that covering both sides about, let's say, in the war going on in Gaza is anti-Semitic is just absurd, and it's simply using it as a tool. And courts, including courts where a Trump appointee is sitting on the bench are pushing back at this, perhaps not as strongly as I think they should, but they're pushing back and they're saying, you're not showing any evidence that you have a real case here of any kind. And the FCC has, throughout its history, pretty much looked the other way at misconduct by broadcasters, like the chain that my reporting got shut down. So to now say we're the watchdog of freedom of the press, very bizarre, and I don't think it will go well in the courts, but it will take a long time to work this through.
And of course, trying to starve outlets like NPR and PBS. Trump would probably say that he's trying to bypass, when he goes to the news media, he bypasses, or he does at times, biased outlets. Does the president have any legal requirements to speak to all of the press, or can he pick and choose?
Yeah, Mark, that's a really good question. The president can pick and choose who he wants to sit down with for interviews, and he just gave one to ABC and another to NBC, but not to CBS. On the other hand, in the press room, in the press pool, in covering public events, no, he should have no ability whatsoever to control who covers him. And I've pointed out to my fellow journalists in America, as a well-known critic of my industry, that you should be pushing back. And if you get pushed out of the White House, that doesn't mean you can't cover the White House. I ran a whole news organization for 7 years that's still around, DC Report. We covered Washington and broke big stories all the time because instead of listening to officials tell us whatever they wanted us to hear, we dug into the public record. We read the Federal Register. We read the executive orders and other actions. And we broke story after story because we weren't waiting for a press briefing to tell us what the story was. We chose on our own what was important for our readers.
Now, of course, Trump really loves the media, of course, doesn't he? He calls it the fake news media, but he really loves to be on it. He was on Meet the Press last weekend. He did a round of several interviews. And the networks, the main networks, gain huge ratings from having him on, even if they are being critical of him. And he loves to sit and watch it as well. I mean, what incentive is there for the mainstream media, if we can call it that without being rude about it, to not have him on as much, or to try to have him on less, basically?
Well, it's our job as journalists to cover the news and to focus on things that, in our opinion, as journalists, are important. That's the only biased journalists should be allowed. We think this is important to cover it. We think that is not important. We're not going to cover it. On the other hand, the way we're doing it is not helpful. Often it's Trump said this, and then a few graphs down, criticism of it. The right way to do this, in my view, and what I've taught for years, is something called a truth sandwich. We're about to tell you something Donald Trump said, which is nonsense or untrue or whatever else. Then you quote Donald, and then you explain. And that way you have set up the viewer, the listener, or the reader to understand that they shouldn't assume that there's a basis for what's about to come. Some news reports are doing this now, but not nearly as many as should. But we have to cover what the President of the United States says. We also need to cover what he does and doesn't do. That's the more important part, in my view. And that was at DC Report. Our motto was covering what politicians do, not just what they say.
We don't have long left, but just finally, are there specific guardrails that are either always already in place or could be put in place to protect the media from, as you would put it, a dictator-style president?
The only thing that will protect journalists are public outrage and the courts. And you're going to see Donald act against journalists. There's no question that's going to happen. They've already made clear that they will search newsrooms if they want to, even though every previous administration under both parties said, no, we're not going to do that, or only under extraordinary circumstances. There'll be efforts to arrest journalists for sure. And as the journalist Donald Trump has said he hates most in the entire world, I'm one of the people who may be subject to that. If I am, I am. But journalists should not cower. They should stand firm, be highly accurate, be careful, and think strategically on behalf of the public.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, Professor David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist. Thank you very much. A pleasure to talk to you here on Q News. Thank you very much.